God, I've been waiting a long time to do this one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 73 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want, and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. Some of you might be saying, hey, I've already seen this episode before. What's going on here? Well, we got rid of all the flickering and also added a couple of new scenes to keep you interested. This is all thanks to one special man named Faz Guy. Thank you so much, sir. So if you haven't watched this episode already, you're in for a real treat. It's the definitive episode. Well, anyways, let's get started. Alright, let's talk about Mega Man, specifically Mega Man's Final Smash. Thanks to tool creator Schools at One, we can actually move the camera around during Final Smashes, and by far the most interesting is Mega Man's. Now while the gang's all here, for some reason they decided not to animate them very much during this whole scene. But you can see that at any given point they are full 3D models, and from different angles you can actually see when they come into frame. But what's even funnier is that when they all line up together, there is one Mega Man who seems to be way off his mark, and if you can take a guess at who it is, it doesn't come as a surprise to me, it's Mega Man.exe. After which the scene changes, all the Mega Men are actually gone because the camera's focused on the opponent getting blasted by the rays, but on the other side of those rays is still a very angry looking Mega Man all by his little lonesome. Pass it off to another popular franchise, I want to take a look at Dr. Wily's castle itself. Very happy to report there's a lot of 3D rendering for a model in the background that is, for the most part, shown at no other angle than what's directly in front of you. But since we can take the camera anywhere we want, we can actually see that there's lots of great angles that we can check out the skull with, even if chunks of Dr. Wily's castle is missing because it would never be seen by the player. And as for the Yellow Devil, well, one thing that it does is that it goes all the way up into the sky in the background, and then it drops down from the sky in the foreground. And of course I wanted to see if the chunks actually did a flight path that was legitimate to the spot, but of course that's not the case. As you can see here, after a certain point off camera, it just starts to disappear when it goes up in the sky, and alternatively in the foreground, it just starts to randomly appear at a certain portion of the sky that's also off camera. After looking inside the many heads of all the characters in this game, which, by the way, I have a new appreciation for how many characters are actually in this game now that I've actually had to study each one, it's very uncommon to see anything underneath a character's hat. However, for the vanilla Link, not Toon Link, there's actually a full set of hair underneath his cap. Now, if you want to speculate why there would be a full set of hair underneath his cap, I could probably tell you. There's totally a palette swap in this game that Link can use that's supposed to not have a cap, and it's his outfit from Skyward Sword. But my guess is that the developers changed their mind on this subject and left the cap on so that the hitbox could be completely the same. And this won't be the last time you'll see some touch-ups and weird errors that were made and hidden. Another fun thing to look at is Sheik's head. See, normally there's a huge wraparound of cloth that covers up Sheik's face entirely. But of course, you can always see a little bit of bandage over the nose, and sometimes the nose would peek through and you could see the entire nose filled with bandages. But one thing that was very difficult to see was the entire face, and how that is also completely wrapped up in bandages. All the way down to the chin, in fact, except there's no neck. Let's talk about this stage real quick. One thing that I noticed is that this entire town is completely detailed. Not really any low poly shenanigans going on here. It almost seems like it was ripped from the actual game, because there's little details that the developers could have just not wasted their time with, like flowers on the ground and textures and narrow passageways that the player pretty much will never be able to see. But you may notice that there's one thing missing from this entire area, and that's people, living objects. And I suppose that makes sense, but there are some things that are flying around, and you probably know what that is. It's the loft wings. Now, can we say that the loft wings have the same level of fidelity and detail that the stage itself seems to have? Well, no. The loft wings, on the other hand, seem to be very low detailed to almost a hilarious degree. Can we just just take a moment to think about how crazy it is that Cloud is in Smash Brothers? No, we're past that now? Okay. Well, as far as what's inside of Cloud's model, there isn't too much going on. But I guess this is a good time as any to show you something that I've been kind of holding back from this point. In Super Smash Bros. Wii U, the eyeballs in each character can be really different from one another. Normally in video games, there's kind of a theme as far as what kind of eyes they use for their games, but in Super Smash Bros., you can get things like half eyeballs or textures over eye sockets. It's so strange, and in Cloud's case, he gets a half eyeball. And of course we have to check out Midgar. Are you kidding me? It looked so amazing when I first saw it. And before I start, I gotta say real quick, you guys are being spoiled right now. See, the game actually is supposed to have a big, bright light wherever there's a void. Awful. You think the flickering on the screen's annoying? Just get a look at this, man. But once again, thanks to School's Out 1, who I'll leave a link to in the description down below, we can now see Midgar in every bit of detail it's supposed to show. And believe it or not, Midgar, although looking really complicated in the background, is all just a mirage. It's trickery. Because as dense and complex as it kind of looks, the second you pull the camera in a direction the game doesn't want you to go, you can see the developers made absolutely nothing for those areas. At this point, they were masters at creating stages. There's no little cute mistakes here, and what you get as a result is a very beautiful looking background. And if you think that's interesting, wait till you get a load of all the summons. And now let's talk about Punch-Out, specifically Little Mac. Now, you might remember a moment ago I was talking about how Link had hair underneath his head. Well, same thing could be said about characters with hair. Usually if a character has hair in Super Smash Bros., there's nothing underneath that set of hair, but for some reason, Little Mac is a different case. If you take the camera through Little Mac's hair, you can see he has a scalp, and it's a very weird looking scalp. It almost looks like brain. People in the comment section of this last video loved this scene, and they wanted to talk about it at length, and they let me know that it's actually teeth textures. So they're hiding Little Mac's teeth textures on his scalp. And the reason why they bothered to do that is because there's a wireframe version of Mac that you can actually see the scalp of through the mesh of his wireframe hair. Now we're going to talk about the boxing ring, which pretty much cemented Little Mac as a character. This stage was one of the very few hints that ever alluded to a character prior to his announcement. And now that we can move the camera, we can pretty much see all these audience members in their various stages. Some that are low resolution textures that still move around, right down to full 3D models of audience members that are just barely hanging on to life over here, it looks like. Whether you're a fan of weasel-faced men or inanimate little blotches, this stage pretty much has everything you could possibly want. Now, I've already done an in-depth look at the Onett stage from my Melee episodes, so if you want to see an even deeper look at this stage, I recommend taking a look at one of my really old videos. Feel free to hit mute if you don't like my old commentary. But we're taking a look at Onett again because with Smash 4 there are Omega stages. And Onett is one of those stages that makes somewhat of a drastic change. Some of the things you'll notice that are different this time around is the fact that the drugstore is now enormous, but a lot more subtle differences, like for example the baseball field in the foreground that you really couldn't see anyway is gone, as well as an outdoor building light that's normally on the drugstore building being hidden underneath the ground. Probably the scene that I initially left out that caused the most amount of outrage was Sonic's stage. And I totally understand, Sonic's a heavy hitter, and he actually has a pretty interesting stage as well. And I say this because the background is insane. There's not a lot of 2D textures here that try to convince you of an illusion. Pretty much what you see back here is an actual world, complete with 3D polygons representing all the hills. All I can say is I'm sorry. Again, the only reason why I was left out is for time management and also trying to figure out how to keep the conversation going long enough so you can really get an idea of how big this area is. Pikmin franchise, one of my favorites. So in this all new Pikmin level, you got things like ceramic pots that you can break and crabs running around and Pikmin running around. It's kind of a crazy mess, in a good way. So some of the stuff that I found in this stage is when you go below it, you can find fragments of the pot. It seems that they're stored under here because there's two different versions of the pot. I tried to find the exact moment in which they're called into action, but you can take a look at this footage and judge for yourself. I got a little bit confused, to be honest with you. And as for the crabs, bulborbs, and Pikmin, well, unfortunately, as soon as they get outside of the camera's view, they just disappear. There's nothing really exciting about what goes on behind the scenes here. But by far my favorite thing is this tunnel over here. See, the player's allowed to see this tunnel with a nice 3D render, but if you look inside the tunnel, you can see that there's a weird 2D texture, almost as if the developers thought they could just draw a tunnel on this 2D texture, and then realized it didn't look so great, so they changed their mind and actually added a 3D render. But what's even funnier than that is that you can see a cookie cut down below of a hole where the tunnel would be. So now my theory is that the texture was once raised well above, and then you couldn't really see as much as the developers probably wanted, so they moved the texture down, and then they thought they could get away with just drawing the tunnel on the texture, and then they changed their minds about that, and then put the render of the tunnel over that texture. The Great Cave Offensive is a Kirby stage in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U that meshes a whole bunch of themes together into one spot. And with so much to look at in this stage, you might actually miss the fact that in the background there's a whole bunch of stalactites that make up a actual cave. And the area of this backdrop is so super massive that it actually eclipses the entire stage itself, which is already really big. The Kid Icarus stage is another one that I didn't include just because it didn't seem like it was all that interesting in comparison to everything else, while also considering about time management. But due to the size of this stage, there is a lot to look at. One of the things I think you folks at home will appreciate is all the coliseums in the background. For something so tiny and minuscule, and for most people didn't even know existed, there is a fair amount of detail that actually went into these things. So there's two cool things that I found that revolves around Mii's. The first one is for the Pilot Wing stage. As it turns out, there's actually a silhouette 3D model for a pilot, and it actually has Mii-like features that extend past the cockpit itself, which I have always failed to realize. The other thing I wanted to show you is the Miiverse stage. While unfortunately I can't show you Miiverse posts from a different angle, I can show you that the backdrop for the stage goes way long ways. I don't know why. And what's even cooler than that is that the ceiling tiles are different from the tiles that you normally see in the stage. These ones actually lack the Miiverse pictures on every other tile. Now it's time to take a look at Animal Crossing. There's three things to look at with Animal Crossing. Of course, the first one being Town and City and seeing how that works. Much like my Animal Crossing episodes that I've done in the past, the Town and City in Smash 4 also have a bend to them. But since both are loaded at the same time in this particular case, they actually use culling depending on which part of the world you're looking at within the level. And as for the villager himself, there's two things to talk about here. The first being a triangular texture that seems to be inside of his head. It's a little tough to say what it is in this case, but it kind of resembles his nose. And the other awesome thing I wanted to talk to you about is what does the other characters look like when the villager uses his net? Well, this gets pretty funny. Depending on how large the character is, sometimes the game will actually shrink down limbs or body parts to make sure that it fits inside the net and doesn't clip through. Like for example, Bowser here has a teeny tiny little head, and Charizard gets his wings shrunk down along with his arms. Obviously, when we talk about Captain Falcon, we have to talk about Captain Falcon's final smash. Much like the Mega Man Final Smash, Captain Falcon's Final Smash actually goes into a separate area with very controlled cameras that you can't even manipulate if you pause the game. So with this new level of freedom, we can see exactly what we have to work with. And while I can tell you there isn't a lot hiding here, there is one little thing that's kind of funny. Inside of Captain Falcon's cockpit, you can see that, yeah, he's just sitting there in the correct position. However, the one thing that's a little funny here is that the seat that he's supposed to be sitting on is raised through his torso. And as for all these little arenas that you end up seeing, you might wonder where it is on the map. While I can't show you how the characters transition from that area to the actual stage, I can tell you that the camera stays in the same position as it was when we were in that special area. And so when the camera pans back to the actual stage, you can see that it actually faces in a different direction from the stage and it's several feet above it. Also really quick, people want to know if Captain Falcon has eyes in this one because he did have eyes in the Super Smash Bros. Brawl episode. Leaving a link to that in the video description if you're curious. But unfortunately, this time around, he does not. Yeah, I'm telling you right now, we would not be looking at the Pyrosphere stage if Schools Out 1 did not find a code to get rid of that blinding white light, because this one needed it super bad. But I really wanted to look at this stage because there's plenty of areas where you can see a crack in the wall, and there's clearly a lot of environment behind it. And all I want to do is just give you a little bit of a tour inside of those areas. While there's nothing too exciting in here, it is fun to see just how far they jettison outside of the original stage when you look at it from inside the void. There's a couple things to talk about. With Jigglypuff, it's very similar to how the villager is, with a weird triangular texture inside of her body. This time around, it's a little easier to figure out what this texture is supposed to represent. It has the same features as her ears. As for the brand new Pokemon stage, oh, it's pretty interesting. As you probably know, in this stage, there's transitions that change it from different types of Pokemon. And when you take the camera outside of that transitional swooping thing, you can actually see that the stages just immediately swap with one another. And I was incredibly thorough here. I actually did use a code that reduces the game to 1 frame per second, and even then there's no quick swapping around or anything like that. It just immediately transitions from one frame to the next. And another fun little thing to look at is the water portion of this stage. As a lot of you probably already know, there's a water slide that essentially goes down from one side to the other with a nice little water effect. But did you know that that water effect is all one object, and it starts off in a very funky way before getting to the top of the slide, and when it gets to the bottom of the slide you can see that one object of water just sliding right off into the void. The first up with Wario's franchise, WarioWare, we want to look at the stage, of course. One thing I really liked about this is that when you turn the camera around when the mom's trying to spot you, you can see that the developers place an object that has back-face culling. This object is present to change the lighting in the stage, and if you look from the back facing forward, you can actually see it. Also, in the case of Wario, when he uses his head bite attack, it's very similar to how it is with Villager when he goes to capture someone with the net. Just about any character that goes inside of his mouth has his head shrunken down to make sure that it doesn't clip through him. With the stage from Xenoblade Chronicles, a lot of what you don't see isn't rendered, which is a heck of a lot different from the actual Xenoblade's Gower Plains. In the actual game, everything is rendered whether it be low poly or not, but it's all there and it's actual 3D objects. Here, there's a lot more corner cutting at play, but there is one thing that kind of surprised me, and that is that the Mechonis in the background is, once again, fully rendered, which is always a great treat to see. Although there isn't much to look at in Shulk's Final Smash room, a lot of people who watched the initial episode were asking about it, so I figured I'd just include it so you guys have a peace of mind. Street Fighter's Suzaku Castle is a lot like the Mega Man stage, in that the building in the background is mostly rendered, but in this stage you mostly get to see it from a certain angle, and so there's actually more rendering on that side of the building. Turn it around to the other side where you most likely can't see any of it at all, and you'll find that pretty much most of it's missing for optimization. Here's a couple of things I wanted to rapid fire to you folks, because I didn't want you to think that I just didn't look. I'm running out of time here. First up is the Wii Fit stage. If you move the camera through the mirror, for some reason it just goes into wireframe mode, which is not something I'm used to seeing with mirror effects in video games. Next up is the Pac-Man stage, and if you zoom out this stage, you can see that pretty much the entire thing is in one shot. When it cuts to a different scene, that gets its own scene, but even that has more to show than what the game lets on. And while I couldn't move the camera through the home run contest, I could move the camera around in the All-Star Mode rest area. Man, did Fire Emblem get a lot of love in Smash 4. It's only a shame that there's still not that much to talk about in terms of it. After looking through every single character, there wasn't much to see, but the stage itself can certainly make up for that. The Coliseum has a lot of background scenery, and although it's a lot like the boxing ring, the Coliseum has a few different tricks up its sleeve. Those of you who don't like your immersion broken, and I gotta ask why you're watching my show if that's the case, will be happy to find out that all the gears and gizmos that raise the platforms are forever under the stage when they're not being used. And of course, we gotta do a proper zoom out for this one.
It's me, Mario!
There's no short supply of Mario stuff, I will tell you that. First thing I want to show you is Bowser Jr.'s clown car, and how if you take the camera inside of it, you'll see that all the contraptions that expose itself, depending on what move you use, is all stored inside the model at any given time, which cannot be said for a lot of other characters and their special weapons. The planet that you fight on in the Super Mario Galaxy stage is actually a very small portion of an actual planet. Most of it is completely unrendered. The Yoshi's Woolly World stage has a lot of weird transitions to it, and when zoomed out, shows a lot of what's going on behind the scenes. And although I've been trying to avoid using Brawl and Melee stages, one thing I found here that was actually pretty funny is that the clouds that scroll across the screen in the Super Mario World stage actually do run on a track where once it's off camera, it quickly runs back into position rather than unload and reload. Before we move on to the final clip, I just wanted to show you the Duck Hunt stage from a different perspective. And I always try to save the best for last. And surprisingly, it's from a stage that I wasn't all that impressed with initially, the Wrecking Crew stage. But if you take the camera around this stage, you'll be surprised to see that there's an entire cityscape back here, complete with roads and unique buildings. And how many buildings there are? Well, I couldn't even count it out for you. Because if you zoom all this out and try to get every single building into one shot, you're gonna be sitting here for several minutes. I'm actually speeding up the footage here 4 times its original speed so that I can save you a little bit of time. Oh boy, this episode was a beast. Thank you very much for watching, by the way. If you want, you can watch a Super Smash Bros. Brawl episode that I made. I put a lot of work into that one as well. Or if you're okay with just content and you don't care that my commentary is awful, you can check out a Melee episode. They'll both be in the link down below. Also, people have been asking me about giveaways or contests, and Nintendo Force was able to hook me up. See, I recently did an interview with them and they sent me 5 copies of the issue. So if you want, you can participate in a giveaway, and all you gotta do is just be subscribed to the channel, but you gotta make sure you click the link in the video description down below that says contest. Winners will be able to get an autograph if they want, and one lucky winner out of the 5 will get a brand new issue of Nintendo Force to go along with that older issue with the interview. Either way, I appreciate that you watched the video, and I'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves.